So I'm Meg Davis at the Graduate Institute. I'm a senior researcher here at the Global Health Center, and welcome. We're really excited to share this film with you this evening and to talk about it. So just a quick introduction to the film for those who haven't seen it yet. And the link is available. You can watch it until tomorrow, so you still have time to catch it. Colectiv begins in the Colectiv nightclub in Romania, where a rock band is singing about health sector corruption and other kinds of corruption. A fire breaks out, leading to injuries and deaths, dozens of people. And we then follow a team of newspaper journalists as they begin to investigate and uncover a vast case of healthcare fraud that enriched corrupt officials and led to deaths of dozens of people. So as the public pressure grows as a result of the investigations, the filmmakers then follow a patients' rights activist who becomes Minister of Health and who struggles to really create change. The film has been nominated for an Academy Award, and as I mentioned, you can watch it online for free until tomorrow. So this evening, to talk about the film, I'm joined by one of the people who is featured in the film, Cătălin Tolontan, who is one of the best-known sports journalists in Romania and who's editor-in-chief of Gazeta Sporturilor, and he'll correct me if I've mispronounced that, which is published both in the journal. His work is also published on his blog. And he first became known about 10 years ago when his investigations revealed a major case of corruption in football clubs in Barcelona and Romania. Also joined by Lydia Gall, who's a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, human rights lawyer who's previously worked on documenting violations in Israel and occupied Palestinian territory, and who did strategic litigation on behalf of Romani victims of rights abuses. And in a little bit, we'll be joined by Alexander Nanau, the director, who was born in Romania and has done a series of documentary films which have received widespread acclaim. He's not with us right yet because he is meeting with Academy Award voters, but he'll be joining us in about 15 minutes. So I just want to check that everything's okay because I just see we have this kind of odd screen showing up here, but hopefully it's all right. Okay, good. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you. Welcome. Maybe we'll start with some questions for Cătălin because we're very curious to hear about your experience working on this case. And I'm especially curious why a sports journal was the one that first revealed this case, why it wasn't some of the more mainstream media in Romania.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. First, I have to say that for the sake of accuracy, that the movie was not nominated for the Oscar. It's only on the short list. And the difference for sure means 1 month for us to expect, because we are now, not me. It's about the director credit, 100%. On the first 15 movie in the 2 categories. And then for nominees, we have to go in the first 5, which is very, very hard to be there, but we'll see. Yes. Now, this is a very well-founded and ubiquitous question, and yet I have not been able to give a smart answer to it after 1 year. Let's say something like this: that the taxpayers' money from which public procurements are made are not divided by color according to areas. There is not bronze public money less valuable for sports investments, for stadiums, and no silver or gold public money for the health system. So there are journalists who are looking for this money, for these facts, for corruption, no matter where they happen. And if you do that not for 1 year, I think for decades, then people gain confidence in you, in your paper. We have been working in investigation for more than 25 years. And 2 ministers and dozen of senior officials went to jail. Of course, this is not our duty to put people in jail. We are actually a newsroom, not a courtroom. But the state recovered more than 10 million euro from those convicted. And this is not about money. We think it's about hope. It's about the symbolism of things can change first.
Mm. Okay, so I'm curious then, because the partnership between a filmmaker and an investigative journalist it's not something you see often in film. And I'm curious, when he first approached you with the idea of doing this film and working with you on the film, did you have any hesitations? And then I'm asking my follow-up question right away, which I know is bad journalistic practice, but when you actually did work with him on the film, did his presence affect your relationship with the people you were interviewing, or did he just fade into the background?
At first, I had a narrow mind. And my first answer was no way to be here in our newsroom, because I thought about the newsroom as a refugee with boring norms and standards, which is it, actually, yes. And we're afraid first of all that the whistleblowers could suffer.
Mm.
After that, we changed our mind in 1 month. And we called him and told him something like this: okay, we have a hint, a small one, but we can try. We can try. Maybe will be something, we'll see, a path, a route to something bigger. Maybe not, we'll see. And after that, I think now when I look back, I was silly because I didn't saw something so clear now. Something like this. The Italian media wrote something like this: Nanau, the director, Alex, films Romania but frames the world. Because he works so hard and he touched a sensitive nerve from all over the world. And this is very reliable, I think, for our profession, also for journalists.
But when you were interviewing people and he was present, that didn't affect...
Yeah, sorry, I'm missing the second part of your question, yes.
Yeah.
To be honest, first for 1 or 2 months, because we are talking about 1.5 years, day by day, but he came alone. At first, of course, we feel something like uncomfortable, because you know the newsroom means rush hour every hour and every day, and a lot of people there. You can see in a movie, in the Colectiv movie, this kind of rush hour every day. But we feel so and so, but he really disappeared. He really disappeared because not only because he came alone, but because he used a lot of tactics. I give you only one example in my rusty English. He didn't talk with us, I think, only one a week, because he keeps silent. And of course, after 2 years, I asked him, what you keep, what? And his answer is something like this: because I don't want to put your energy under the normal field on the newsroom. I don't want to drain your energy, your language, your ideas. I want all your ideas in my movie.
Interesting. So it really, you developed a relationship of trust, and you were able to let him kind of just be there and observe.
Yes, without sound.
Without sound.
Yes.
Interesting. One of the things that's the most chilling in the film is towards the end, of course, when you and your colleagues start to talk about receiving direct threats linked to the reporting that you're doing. And I'm just curious, when the film came out, what kind of repercussions you may have experienced, to the degree you feel comfortable to share that, you know?
Yeah, of course. Of course, there is a dose of risk, but so many professions in the world are stressful and risky. In general, you fear for those around you, not for you, not for yourself. My colleague Mirela is a single mother and raised her daughter Anna, calling her 10 times per day from 4 to 16 years old. In decades, I learned Anna's whole diet menu by heart, day by day. Sure, there were cars that went after us, sometimes after Anna, but that's part of our job. And for Der Spiegel wrote about us like European heroes, and I think it's too much. And actually, it's not true, because the real heroes, in our opinion, of course, are the victims, the families of the children, and the whistleblowers. These are the heroes for us.
Well, you could also be a hero.
No, I think it's better for our profession and for the public to be, I don't play humble here, but I think it's efficient, sorry, to keep your norms and your duty, sorry, only. I think this is the way to seek for information, because if you became, and this is a interesting effect of Colectiv movie for us, if you became a Bigfoot journalist, your work will be harder, because you can't meet people in public. And we have a lot of people to meet in public, because everybody know you.
Yeah, so they immediately suspect someone's a whistleblower.
Yeah.
They see them talking to you.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure this is ringing bells for Lydia as a human rights researcher, because often human rights researchers come under the same kinds of pressures. And Lydia, you've also done some kind of related work in Hungary, looking at acquired infections in hospitals due to malpractice, underinvestment. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you saw in that work.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me. And I really just want to say that I love the movie. It touches on so many issues that I also face in my work. And it's, it also shows the importance of investigative journalism and what it can actually bring to the table for the people who are sort of directly affected by the reporting. So really, like, hats off. It's really stellar work by Kathleen, Alex, and all of the colleagues that were involved. I mean, I don't even know where to begin, because I recognize a lot of what Kathleen is saying in terms of the challenges that this type of investigations bring with them. When I was looking at hospital infections in Hungary, it was extremely difficult to do the investigation, whether it was accessing information that should be public, like statistical data from authorities. It was just an absolute and complete nightmare. And then once you actually get something, then it's also often blurred and made completely illegible unless you give it to like a serious medical expert who can actually make some sense of whatever data that they provide you with. But also that you constantly have the understanding of whatever you get from the authorities, particularly when it comes to statistical data, might not actually show an accurate picture. And then it's really up to you to find, like in the case of Kathleen, whistleblowers or patients who were directly affected, so that you can kind of show that there is a systemic pattern of a problem that you can attribute to, in the case of Hungary, in the case of my work, government negligence or government direct action.
Lydia, tell us about the research, because I think a lot of people.
Yeah. So basically, hospital. So like in the movie, it kind of starts off with these people who are fire burnt, and they get into hospital, and they basically end up dying, not necessarily because of their burn wounds, but because of bacteria that are flourishing in all hospitals in the world. These are bacteria that exist everywhere. You cannot eradicate them completely, but what you can do is try to minimize the impact of these bacteria. And the question is, what steps governments and authorities are taking to minimize the numbers and minimize the deaths? So what I was specifically looking at was the needlessly high numbers in Hungary, and what was the cause of that. And so the more I started digging, it basically went back to the core thing of an extremely inefficient and corrupt public healthcare system. And I think Katalin will recognize a lot of that in Romania as well. Slightly different maybe than in the case that is portrayed in the movie. We are talking about an elite of doctors in Hungary that have an interest in maintaining this extremely inefficient, heavily bureaucratic, heavily underfunded, understaffed system because they simply make a profit out of it. So in Hungary, that usually means that you give essentially bribes to doctors in order to get what you think is going to be good care. Now, needless to say, that's not necessarily going to be the case, but it creates a system where which is not patient-centered, it's not care-centered, it's somehow profit-centered for a specific clique within the medical profession that somehow profit off of this. I did come across stories similar to the ones in the movie where, when it comes to public procurement and how, the corruption involved in that, how hospital directors were taking money in order to feature specific types of supplies in their facilities. But I mean, at the end of the day, the effects of this corruption was simple things like nurses telling patients that they have to reuse one use only type of supplies because they simply didn't have any. So a concrete example, a woman who they wanted to draw blood from her and they took a used needle that they basically had in a pot, in the kitchen, essentially. Or the other woman who was in for, and these were normally routine surgeries. So, or healthy people, relatively healthy people when they came into the hospital environment. There was one woman who went through a cesarean section and the whatever tube that was hooked into her to monitor her after the actual cesarean fell out on the dirty floor, and the nurse just simply took it and plunged it right back into the woman. And as a result, she developed all sorts of hospital bacteria and ended up having serious, long-lasting repercussions as a result of this. And I myself have gone through a cesarean, so I know what it should look like. Like you can recuperate and, everything, should normally be fine. But in that case, it wasn't. A lot of it went back to very poor hygiene, extremely poor hygiene, actually, to the point where patients are asked to bring their own hand soap to hospitals, their own toilet paper. I spoke to many people who basically said that the hospital environment was so dirty that they actually had relatives bring in cleaning supplies to clean toilets, etc. Very poor isolation of suspected infectious patients or known cases of infected patients, which of course is a huge problem because obviously then there is a risk of spreading this particular bacteria to other people on the ward and elsewhere. And it all comes back to, in this case in Hungary, very simple preventive measures that you could take. Like the very basic one, hand soap, and how to use that correctly. If you don't have hand soap, you obviously can't use it, and that in itself creates a risk for bacteria to flourish.
So it sounds like a lot of it is sort of bad practices, bad management, incompetence. But I think that's common in lots of places. I mean, I grew up in a relatively not so wealthy part of New York, and there's that there as well. But I think the kind of corruption that you documented and that we see in the film is of another order of magnitude. And I'm just curious, with all of the money that's flowing in some cases to address COVID, maybe not enough money in some cases, but how is that affecting this kind of dynamic? Katalin, if you seeing sort of an increase in problems in response to COVID in Romania?
Yes, of course, because we don't heal the mentality. Earlier, we hear here a lot of things about Hungary. And what I have to say is that we came from a part of the world when the doctors are gods, are really gods. And we are not talking about the social status only or about the ego. No, we are talking about a profound and precisely relationship between doctors and the ordinary people. Yes? Even myself, if I look at me when I going in a hospital, I put my head down. This is my primary reflex during my childhood. And even now, and in my 50s, I put my head down because he is a god.
Wow.
And I think this is true not only in Hungary, in Czech Republic, in Romania, in Bulgaria. A small segment of this kind of exception relationship, we can see all over the world. Because I can't remember one profession, maybe there are some professions, but I can't remember right now a profession when you are in a legal situation to represent the both parties. But the one doctor can treat and should treat the patient and also take the money, the sponsorship from the big pharma companies. And this is legal. It's legal in US, illegal in Switzerland, it's legal in Hungary, it's legal in Romania. This is not a reliable situation for a lawyer, or of course for a judge, for prosecutors. But for a doctor, it's legal. And I think this, and the second part, I think, which is the same situation all over the world. And we saw in the reaction after the Colectiv move in Norway, in Switzerland, in Canada, in US. The hospitals, some of them, of course, are working like a black box. You can't go there, you don't know what is happening there.
So there's no accountability,
no. And lack of transparency is generally a huge cost to our society.
Yeah.
And if we are talking about the health system, the cost means life, not only money.
Yeah. Before I continue, I just want to say, please use the Q&A box and ask your questions, because I'll just keep talking to these two as long as you allow me. But if you have questions, please feel free to post them, and you can join the conversation that way. Lydia, this reverence for doctors in the hospital as a black box, with everything that Human Rights Watch has been reporting about the sort of restrictions on civil society, the power grabs in Hungary, how does this affect the ability to do advocacy and to push for changes?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, I work on Hungary, Poland, and other countries in the region where we have an increasing, creeping authoritarianism in place. And so, of course, to engage in advocacy with governments is extremely difficult. And on this particular issue, when it comes to sort of public health care, Brussels wouldn't be our first sort of go-to station. But on the other hand, what I have seen in the past sort of year or past years, but certainly in the past year, is that doctors themselves now actually have had enough, particularly the younger generation, because the option really is that either they take their, their graduate degrees and move to Sweden or Germany and make 3, 4, 5 times as much money, or they stay in this very archaic, almost feudal system, which is like completely rife with corruption. And so a lot of them sort of ganged together and created sort of an advocacy group, 1,000 doctors against bribes, or something like that would be the translation. And they've actually done they've come a long way. I mean, to the point where they managed to get people who were basically leading this movement to be elected into the Hungarian medical chamber, which in and of itself was a huge win, really, because the medical chambers essentially was full of all these people that somehow benefited from this very corrupt system. So and we've seen very recently actually some changes being made to the Healthcare Act, where they're now banning bribes to doctors and similar things that this particular group of doctors are pushing for. So a lot more needs to be done. I mean, just to cut bribes to doctors is certainly not going to necessarily improve the quality of healthcare that I get, but it's a step in the right direction. So it's important to encourage these healthcare workers to actually speak out. And also, I think, the research that we did was heavily geared towards the Hungarian population. I think that people sort of normalize this a little bit. And Katalin was saying that you view the doctors as gods and you don't question anything, and it's just sort of life as is. But now with COVID, when with hospitalizations going up in very high numbers, and we have an average of 80 to 100 deaths in Hungary per day. You have a situation where a lot more people are being subjected to these appalling conditions. And so I think that, people are getting upset, and they now see what their tax, dollars are not actually being used for. And so people are getting increasingly upset. So I think that combination could work as a push to make those demands that basically, if I go into a hospital, I don't want to come out sicker or die.
I know that's reasonable.
I think that's a reasonable demand.
Yeah, basic good practice. I just want to welcome the director of the film, Alexander Nanau, who's just joined us. So thank you. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. I see a few people posting questions asking about how to see the film. So there's a link that's been shared in the chat box, and then also on the link where you register, you can still see the film until tomorrow. We're here to talk with the director, with one of the people portrayed in the film, and then also with Lydia Gall, who's a human rights expert. So you can still see the film, you haven't missed it, and we definitely encourage you to watch it. Alex, now that we have you, and thanks for joining us, maybe you could just start from the beginning and tell us how this project came about, and especially how you persuaded Katalin and also the health minister to allow you to monitor what they were doing.
Yeah, so basically, once the whole movement in the society happened, with all the demonstrations that started against a corrupted political class after the fire, it was clear that something new was happening in this pretty young democracy, basically Romania, and it felt a bit like something suddenly and finally in Eastern Europe, a young generation, as it happened in the West, 68, really started to claim society from back from a political class, and then from a society that was formed and accepted and tolerated by their parents' generation. It happened in Hungary before with the university. It started already a bit in Poland and the Czech Republic. So we felt we have to do something to understand what is happening. But as I'm doing observational documentaries, it was very hard in the beginning to understand how to tell a story about society. But on top of that came basically this wicked manipulation that really happened day by day after the fire, every half of an hour, by politicians, health authorities, together with doctors, that basically lied to a really grieving society about the fact that they can treat these patients, that the Romanian healthcare system is on top of that, that it's at the highest European standards, which basically is nonsense for anybody living in Romania and having stepped into a Romanian hospital. But just to understand the shock a whole country was in, basically, people believed it. And people wanted to believe it, and the majority of the press just propagated what these wicked politicians and healthcare officials were doing. And we really wanted to to do something, to make a film to understand what's going on, also with the manipulation. And once we understood that, Katalin and his team started to investigate the fireman, the fire department that was lying that they didn't know about the club, although they authorized it basically. And then they had a big investigation, not an investigation really, but they revealed that the authorities were saying they're giving surgery to the burn patients in the newest and most modern burn unit in Bucharest. So, and basically, Catalin's team discovered that this unit was closed with a lock. It was just opened weeks earlier with the Minister of Health for the TV cameras in order to justify the money that was invested there. They didn't have doctors, nurses, anything there. They just wanted to show, okay, we spent the millions of euro again. They got their bribes, I guess. And that's how the Romanian healthcare system works, together with the Minister of Health. And so we approached the journalists because we understood observationally it could be really interesting to shadow the work of journalists investigating this abusive power. And how we made them to let us film. I think that after, rightly so, they said like, no, a newsroom has to stay protected. We have information to protect colleagues and most of all sources. I guess, we met also with our own development / investigative team. And I guess they also thought that we are pretty serious about things, and we also had already sources from inside the system. And one day they made up their mind, and Katalin called me and said, we are onto something. I can't tell you what it is. And they didn't tell me. I had to put the puzzle pieces together myself, even after starting the film. We could try. We could try for you to shadow what we're doing, but I guess they imagined it will take maybe several days. It took several months.
What an amazing process. And, as you're talking about this locked ward, it reminds me of, so I worked at Human Rights Watch as a researcher on China back in like 2001, 2002. And I went to China to document human rights abuses against people living with HIV and talk to young people who were living with HIV who couldn't get access to hospitals. They would call hospitals and get turned away, or would be told you have to pay, because we have to buy new surgical equipment because we can't use what we use with everyone else. And then I went to one of these places and found that they had an HIV ward, but it was locked and closed. So it was the same exact thing. Somebody had been taking money and they built this ward, but they didn't actually want to deal with the realities.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about how the film's reception internationally has affected your work and your life since the film came out? Because you talked a little bit about this when we spoke earlier.
How it affected my work and life? Basically, the fact that it's so well received and distributed around the world prolongs my work to promote the film, which is great. It's really incredible how wide we managed to reach out with the film. The fact that we managed with the distribution team and Magnolia and participant in the States to get the film now shortlisted for 2 categories at the Oscars. For sure, it's a daily work, basically, such a campaign. And also while the campaign is happening, we also continue to open the film in different countries, even though in some of them it happens, or most of them it happens online, because the theaters are still closed. Yeah, that's how it influenced basically my life and work. And it's not as if that wouldn't happen, I could go out and shoot, because it's still a pandemic. It's still hard to start new projects and really enter into production.
But how about the reception in Romania?
The reception in Romania, I think, was very good. We were lucky to be able to show it for 2 weeks before the cinemas closed down last year in cinemas. And we were basically really taken by surprise to see how young the people are that came to see the film. It was for a documentary, it was in a way record breaking, because the bar of cinema viewers for a documentary in the Romanian cinemas, which are not a lot, was around 3,000 to 5,000 viewers in many weeks, and in 2 weeks we had almost 25,000 viewers, which is quite a lot. The generation, the main generation that went to see it in cinemas and that came to our first week where we traveled the country to do Q&As was a generation between 16 and 30, 35. And I think it is because it is the generation that I think also Lydia talked before about it. It is the generation that needs an answer, basically. You know, will I stay or will I go? Because it's a generation that has to clarify for itself if that is a country and a society, basically, which they are ready or not to invest any more time in, because they are, you know, they are people that travel, they are smart, they can study wherever they want, or they have good studies and could work around the world. So the question remains, why would you basically lose time, as your parents did, who also basically all hoped after the revolution, right, that in one generation things will change, and they didn't change. For sure, the country is evolving. I think it's the most evolving country in Europe. But it's still hard because most areas in Romania, if it's not a multinational or the private sector, are basically feudal. It's a feudal system. You can't get in without a lot of bribes and without being well connected. And the question is, for sure, how can you develop in a society that is not based on meritocracy?
Thanks. Yeah, I see a question coming in from Lubna Free, who asks, says she was struck in the movie how the lies and responses from the government were all the same stock sentences, as good as in Germany. How high in the government was this denialist response? Maybe that's more of a question for Catalin.
Yeah.
I will give you a fresh news from Czech Republic, not from Romania, from Prague. Yes. 2 weeks ago, the Czech government turned down offers of help from hospitals in Germany. The Ministry of Health, Jan Blatný, says that moving COVID patient from an overburdened hospital in Cheb, in Bohemia, across the border only for a few kilometers, because the Cheb town is on the border, is not a reliable approach.
Not a reliable approach.
No, it's not a reliable approach.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the same Orwellian rhetorical.
The same response.
Yeah, the same response.
Well,
oh, sorry.
We know what is happening in Czech Republic right now. Yes, they are in a very hard situation, but they don't want to give the permission for the patient to go in Germany.
Wow, because it's
in the same situation, even where the so different countries. Czech Republic, to be honest, is long ahead Romania in progress in democracy and in economics and in health system. And we are now, we're 5 years after the collective fire, but
yeah,
it seems to be a generation still governing the countries, even if, you know, there are younger people that are now, let's say, in the key positions, but they were formed by a whole system that is still thinking as old dictatorships. Like, you know, you can't, you know, we are the best, we can't expose the fact that we don't cope with things. And it seems that they feel that the people that vote for them, that they need, or that they will succeed in holding on to the power, if they make believe that they are basically qualified, capable of handling things. It's very strange, because when it comes then to election day, whenever they talk about Germany or other countries, they say, as you can see also in the film, the foreigners want to take over the management of our hospitals in order to close our hospitals down, steal our money, build good hospitals in Germany. So, you know, vote for us because we will protect your national integrity. It's the same in Hungary, it's the same in the Czech Republic now, in Poland, in Romania. And I think it's it's really an open, it feels like, at least, like it's an open conflict between generations now in these countries.
Yes, they are the same people. Lydia says earlier, we can change in 4 years or in 5 years or in 8 or 10 years our presidents, but we can't change our presidents for Dr. Chambers.
Interesting.
In Romania, they're the same people like in 89, before the revolution, the same people.
Which is, you know, it's interesting you mentioned about building clinics over the borders and stuff, because one of the things I remembered in the film is one of the health officials that you're looking at has stashed away money and opens a clinic in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, it was only a tip. We can't go.
You can't tell us where it is. We can't go visit.
I'm sorry, because
I'm curious.
It's not a public news because we don't check properly.
No, fair enough. Okay,
Sorry.
just curious. Yeah, Lydia, are you also?
You can saw also in the movie a house built from the hospital money, from the citizen money. Yes, the hospital money, the taxpayers' money, and our prosecutors put him in court only after 5 years. In court, we don't have, for all you can see in the movie, we don't have any final verdict in justice after 5 or 6 years.
But in no case that is related to the healthcare system. Even what I told you before, what made us go to the Gazeta Sporturilor, the investigation on their closed down ward that was opened, although it was not functional, then they publicly lied that they were giving surgery there. Even that case was sent to the prosecutors, and it is very clearly a case that has to be prosecuted, and nothing happens. So whatever happens with hospital managers, the opening night of the film, when we opened in cinemas in Romania, when we came out of the opening night, the news were showing the Minister of Health, a woman from the Social Democrats, arrested while she was taking bribes from a contract she did as a hospital manager.
In a COVID period.
In a COVID period. This case, for example, so it's almost a year now, almost a year, minus several days.
Still nothing.
Nothing. They are just, the courts are sending the file from court to court, saying like the other court should deal with the other court. And this woman, this highly corrupt woman that is a Minister of Health, was caught taking bribes by the prosecutors, is at home, and she can be almost sure that her case will never be solved.
So, but just
here I disagree with Alex, because you can't told about somebody that is corrupt without a verdict in justice in court. Yes, but the situation is like this. In 1 year, we don't have a process. We don't have a court in this case. In 5 years, we don't have only one verdict in a dozen of cases.
I'm just, I want to give Lydia a chance to give us the comparison with Hungary again, and just, you know, in terms of the kind of work that these guys have been able to do in Romania, is there similar kind of investigative journalism in Hungary, and is advocacy and litigation on cases like this feasible, or because we get a sense that things are tightening up so much there? How is it looking now?
It is incredibly difficult. I mean, I would say that the media is by and large directly or indirectly controlled by the ruling party. So I would say about 80 to 85% of all media in Hungary are by and large controlled in some way by government or rich business people close to various characters in the government, including the prime minister himself. So that makes the situation very difficult for journalists to do investigative work. They're being, finances are being cut from them, and life is just very difficult for them. But we still have really stellar journalists who are trying, despite all of the obstacles that they have, not necessarily focusing, on healthcare corruption, but definitely on corruption. Now, the situation becomes even more problematic because the ruling party has spent the bulk of a decade capturing all state institutions. So, and that includes the courts, the general prosecutor. So in a case where you have, for instance, a corruption-related case, I mean, the process is actually quite short here. I mean, at least there is some sort of illusion in Romania that something is in the process. Here, the general prosecutor simply said, we don't have any evidence to show anything, so it just cut the investigation short at that point. We just had cases in the summer where the foreign minister was pictured on the yacht of a known oligarch in Hungary who had actually benefited from a lot of public procurement. And that was just waved off as, that's my personal business. And people just, yeah, okay, that's his personal business. In other countries, that would have been reason for dismissal immediately, but not here. So when you have a system when you have captured all these public institutions, when you have rocked those checks and balances that should be there to hold these characters to account, then it becomes extremely difficult. And the ones left to try and unveil, this power abuse, it's being left to journalists and various types of investigators, including human rights investigators that still try and operate in this country, although our life is also becoming increasingly difficult because of various legislative steps that the government is taking to silence any critical voices.
Right. I'm reminded again of the work in China, where in the early 2000s, there was this huge blossoming of incredible investigative journalism, of new civil society groups advocating on health rights, litigation, public interest litigation, training of judges and lawyers, everything. And it's all pretty much been shut down in the past couple of years, past 5-10 years, really, with Xi Jinping coming into power and basically using anti-corruption as a way to kind of remove all opposition and remove any criticism. So I just think it reminds us of how fragile the space is that we have for this kind of work. I see that we're getting towards the end of our time. I don't know if there are any more questions other than lots of people who want the link to the movie. So I hope you get access to that. It's on the website where you registered. You can still watch it until tomorrow, and please do. Alex, while we have you, I just wanted to ask you to tell us a bit about the other people in the film. There's one of the burn victims who is really powerful and in using her public image to try to create space for people to mourn and to process what had happened. And then there was also the health minister, who I understand has been through some ups and downs. So if you could just tell us a bit about what happened to them in the past couple of years, that would be great.
Basically, I would like to start from the parents of the youngsters that were basically killed by the healthcare system. What happened is that, as Katalin says, that they're waiting for the judicial system to do its work, basically. They know very clearly that the Romanian hospitals basically sent them abroad when they finally were forced by nature, because people were dying away, so they preferred them to transfer them outside of the country. They know by now that, very precisely, that the Romanian hospitals sent these kids without indicating that they're infected. So basically, many arrived in hospitals where the doctors became aware that there's something not kosher, basically, that why would they be on the toughest antibiotics, but if there would be no infections, and kept them on the antibiotics. Other hospitals tried to find the right cocktails for the antibiotics and took them off the strong ones, and they died, as the case of Alex Hoxha that we see in the film. It was the youngster that was in a good shape. The Romanian hospital prohibited his transfer to Vienna, where the parents already organized for him to be admitted. And the parents were lied to that, you know, they can't fly, there's fog in Vienna, or they shouldn't move him. He will die if you move him 1 centimeter on another bed. So they're just waiting. They are waiting for a democratic state to basically do what it is supposed to do. But that said, it's very unlikely that the healthcare official will ever be held accountable for what they did. Teddy is still, she's fine. I mean, many of the young burn victims are incredibly strong, and they are still going through a lot of treatment for recuperation of their bodies, and for sure also for their well-being. And for me, Teddy was very important because seeing how a whole society basically, and how even the healthcare system, as the doctor also says in the film, the whistleblower, they cover their faces of the burn patients just not to see them. I think that her courage to come out, show her, expose herself publicly in this exhibition, and basically, I think the most important thing for me was when she says, I'm not, you know, she's asked like what she thinks about the people that did that to her, and she says the only way for me now is to stand up and walk on. I think it's a way of saying, I know who I am, I won't let myself poison by the evil things that others did to me. And it's a very strong statement for a society that is developing, and people that have to learn to, you know, let go of things or understand where they are, and don't let themselves pulled into this bucket of evil, basically. Vlad Voiculescu, the minister that wasn't a politician when we filmed with him during his mandate as a technocrat, basically. Vlad, in the meantime, became part of a newly formed party of so-called reformists, young people that came out of private businesses and said, we should go into politics if we want to change something. So basically, they won enough votes in order to form a coalition government with another big party. And he is back in the ministry as the Minister of Health since last Christmas. We have to see if he can do the same work with the party and the coalition behind it that is formed also of people that belong to the old system.
Yeah. We see so many of those challenges in the film, right? That he can't even fire people that he knows are incompetent and corrupt because of all the protections that are in place. So, yeah, very interesting. Oh, we're almost out of time. So I just want to give you each a chance to say any concluding words before we wrap up. Any last comments or even questions you have for each other in our last few minutes? Katalin, maybe we'll start with you. Journalists always have questions.
Yes, thank you. I thinking about Teddy. I listened Alex earlier, and I think why everybody loves Teddy. Yes, because I think we're in such polarized times. She is unbiased. She don't want to please anybody. The right wing, the left wing doesn't care for she. And she's so unpolarized, unbiased, and reliable, and she is there with all the suffering and the grieving and the past. And I think that the people look at her and think, okay, we are together in this, we are in a collective way. Yes.
Mm,
And feel the power of to being together, which is so seldom in these times.
mm. That's interesting.
Yeah, because in Romania, yes, the young people and the public and the audience liked the collective movie a lot. But the media and not the media, the political environment, the establishment, they don't like the movie. But they like Teddy.
Mm. It's hard to object to her, right?
And for me, it's a bond between us. Teddy means a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a tremendous figure because she also is someone who is so much in control of her own image, in control of, seems to be, and doing it in such a positive way, and really like one of the few people who really has like a sense of optimism for the future in a sense, which is
Yes, and for me, yes, you are right. For me, it's a point of no, it's our point of no return. We can go back in times when the people's lives doesn't have any value.
Yeah.
Because we came from there, to be honest.
Yeah.
In the communist era, people's lives doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Lydia, any concluding thoughts or questions?
I was going to ask Alex and Kathleen to come to Hungary and do something.
I will try.
But no, really, I mean, it was really interesting about Teddy because I think, that optimism, that sort of humbleness that she shows and that sort of hope and yearning for something to actually change just by sort of being that unbiased person. I think, that kind of embodies in a way what I think a lot of people should take away, in Romania or in Hungary or in places where you have similar sort of issues with the public healthcare system, or generally speaking, issues with corruption, that, you deserve better. And the fact is, when it comes to public healthcare, that many of us will end up in hospitals or have our loved ones ending up in hospitals. So it's really in our own interest to take that sort of optimism, that sort of driver for a change, to make sure that, if and when we do end up in such situations, that we can at least expect that we are treated humanely and at sort of the best possible care that can be provided, and not have our faith sort of left in the hands of corrupt hospital managers or officials or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it seems like the minimum we can ask. Thank you. Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, after making this film and understanding so many things about, how power works, how journalism works, and most of all, basically how citizens react or not to things, and being basically in a advantageous position to be an immigrant and not really belong, and being able to to look on the society from the side. I think that it is really now in Eastern Europe and in Romania and in the healthcare system, and as small as we want to go into the different sectors of a society, it is a decision of a generation if they have the needed self-respect to eliminate this old generation's habits and basically version of the world, or how it should work and function. It's really up to a young generation. And I must say that there is such a gap between, in Romania, for example, between the generation above 30 and beneath 30. And I see it by the reactions and the messages I get from really young people, high school students or university students, or older people that older means older than 30, that basically many are so biased in a way that they say, oh, this is a political film. you just wanted to make a long commercial for the journalist Tolontan and most of all for the politician Vlad Voiculescu.
Right.
They are so infected by the same mindset of this old generation that they cannot see anything else. Everything is polarized. Everything is, whatever you do, you have an agenda. Whatever you do, you should not talk about politics, while they don't understand that the fact that they did not have an education that dealt with the country's history and with politics, as you have in the West, where you understand politics is every single thing that deals with myself and the society I live in is already politics. And my opinion are politics. And it's fine to have opinions, and it's fine to have a vision of the world you want to live in and to express it. But they see that as a bad thing. We should not go there. Cinema should not talk about these things. You know, cinema should be something hypothetical, metaphorical, arts. But it's not the position of a young generation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great thoughts. I guess just as we wrap up, you know, coming back to the figure of Teddy, the burn victim, I'm just reminded of the AIDS activists I've worked with, and especially people living with HIV. And one of the things that was the most powerful in their movement has been the rejection of stigma and the rejection of shame that society wants to put on them. Oh, you know, you should be ashamed of having this virus. And when people stand up and say, no, I'm living with HIV and I'm positive and I reject that shame, what it does is it puts the shame back on the system that has failed to help them. It kind of deflects the shame in a way to the people who have failed to meet their needs, to take care of them, to provide them with basic right to health. And so that refusal to accept shame and stigma can be so powerful. And maybe it's part of what makes her such a compelling figure. But anyway, I'm sure we could talk for another half hour easily, but I know we're out of time. So I really want to thank Human Rights Watch, thank the Graduate Institute for bringing us all together, and thank our three amazing panelists, Katalin Tolontan, Lydia Gill, and Alexander Nanau, and all of you for attending. Thanks very much, and good luck with the Academy Awards, and we'll be watching.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.